Welcome to the season finale of High Side, Low Side, Season 8. This is episode 12. Zack and I are going to sit down with the stand-up comedian and motorcycle aficionado, Alonzo Bodden. We are very excited for all the laughter that I'm sure is about to ensue. We're also going to talk about clutchless motorcycles and so much more. But before we do any of that, we need to get a word in from our sponsor, Motul.
That's right. And in this episode of Zack Names Products You Didn't Know Motul Has, I'm on to Motul Diesel System Cleaner. What are the chances that you ride a motorcycle that's powered by a diesel engine? Very, very low. But what are the chances you use a truck, van, or vehicle to haul or tow your motorcycles that uses a diesel engine? Much higher, I would say. The point is, Motul has your back. Just like Motul has high side, low sides back. To learn more about Motul's products, go over to RevZilla.com/Motul. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL.
And while you're over there on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out QuadLock. QuadLock has not only a slew of phone case mounts for you and your motorcycle, but they also have mounts for your automobile, because I'm guessing a lot of you out there are also riding in a car at least part of the time if you're not on your motorcycle. And QuadLock allows you to easily take mounting your phone from your bike to your car. You can learn about all of the QuadLock products over at quadlockcase.com. And to shop the entire collection of QuadLock, you can go to RevZilla.com/quad-lock. That's RevZilla.com/quad-lock. And while you're over there, just remember to check out the RPM program, because you can now spend less while riding more. That's because the RPM program is only $39.99 a year. You're getting a $15 welcome package. You're getting 5% cash back in RPM cash. Free 2-day shipping. I mean, it really, you need to go check it out for yourself. You can learn more at RevZilla.com/RPM. And now, on with the show.
Okie dokie, everybody. Off we go on another high side, low side journey. Very excited to get Mr. Alonzo Bodden in here to talk about motorbikes, life, and everything in between. But first, of course, we need a Not the News topic. This one is very interesting, and Spurg, I'll let you intro it because you were the one that shared it with me initially.
Yeah, so I found an Instagram post that was taken from, I believe it was Red Bull Romaniacs, or it was
maybe
Erzberg, or
it was from Erzberg. Yeah.
Erzberg. Okay. Mm-hmm. And KTM had debuted an adventure bike, but it was missing one significant piece of hardware. It didn't have a clutch lever. So it looks like KTM will be introducing a clutchless version of their bike. And the real question we have is, what does this mean for the world of automatic motorcycles? And I think we just wanted to chew the fat on this a little bit. And if unless you have anything else, Zack, I think we can start the timer and officially kick the discussion off.
Start it up. So a couple things about this that were kind of interesting. One, this is, if you know anything about the Honda DCT system, Honda dual clutch transmissions, which are available on Africa Twins, on Goldwings, and a few other models as well. It basically is an automatic transmission, essentially. That's what you need to know about it from a layperson's point of view. And you can use little trigger buttons for your index finger and your left thumb to shift up and shift down if you would like to, or the transmission will operate automatically as you go down the road, just like, in many ways, just like an automatic car transmission would do. The KTM one is similar, though. They have a foot pedal, right? In this one, there's a lever that you can use to just like sort of kick the lever down or kick the lever up to shift when you want to, or let the bike do it automatically. So it's a slightly different mantra, a little bit more hands or perhaps feet on, but in general, the same idea. And as a KTM owner and adventure rider, Spurg, I'm very curious to hear what you think about KTM going in this direction.
So it's interesting. I think this plays a lot into, you and I have had the conversations, I think even on the podcast, around, I'm not a huge fan of quick shifters.
Right. You don't even like the quick shifter option, the electronic quick shifter on a bike with a clutch.
Yeah. And I think that honestly is such a sophisticated setup now. You and I had this discussion recently offline just around the F900 GS and the inability to be able to turn the quick shifter off. At least with the KTM, you can turn it off and you get a little of that feel back. But I think as an adventure rider, I don't know if you want this. Like I think.
Have you used a Recluse clutch? A recluse clutch, for those who are not familiar, will allow enough clutch slippage for the engine to keep running, so that if you're in first gear and you're going really slow down a creek bed or something like that, that bike won't stall or is less likely to stall. And have you used that system, Spurge?
I have, and I do
And
not
do you
like
like
the
it?
feel of that either. No.
I see. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're just old school, man. You want a clutch lever in your left hand and a cigar in your right hand, and
Yeah. I mean, I think you should stop right there before it goes into what I want to
other
elsewhere.
appendages.
I guess I can understand how, and I can appreciate how this is making motorcycling more approachable, right? There's a reason that there's a DCT version of the Goldwing, because they're selling them. And there's a reason that there's a DCT version of the Africa Twin, because they're selling them. So I can understand what KTM is trying to do here. I think it'll be interesting to see which bikes get them and which bikes don't, and whether or not this is really something that the hardcore adventure rider is looking for, or if it's something that's maybe, a little bit more of the average rider would appreciate.
Right. It's interesting because, it's very interesting because KTM is sort of like KTM reaches for and has built a sort of like you said, a hardcore base of customers that really likes, adventure riding to be, difficult and hard nosed and that kind of thing. And it makes me wonder if KTM sees this as a convenience or if they see it as a performance upgrade, like a recluse clutch on an enduro bike, So it's curious. It'll be curious to see if and how they market it. And
also how it works. We're
true.
just seeing hints of this out on the internet for the first time. So I think that, to my knowledge, this would only be the second manufacturer outside of Honda going towards an automatic type system.
Well, there have been other automatic transmissions in the past, I believe.
In the past, but I'm talking about right now.
Current.
Yeah.
Current.
I don't know. Kawasaki might have something.
Does that hybrid bike have? I haven't ridden that one yet. Shamefully, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is interesting developments going on with KTM and potentially dual clutch transmissions, which is, if for no other reason, it's interesting because Honda and KTM are often seen as being on opposite ends of the sort of aggression spectrum as brands, and yet they're both interested in playing in the sandbox. So
but the important thing is, if you are playing the high side, low side drinking game, we've barely scratched the surface of the episode, and we've already talked about KTM for about 3.5 minutes based on that timer. So I'm going to take a drink while Zach now lets you know how excited we are to move on to our guest.
Great segue. Alonzo Bodden is a professional comedian. He is a motorcycle lover. He was once an airplane mechanic. He has a lot of interesting things in his past and his present. We think that he'll be an interesting guest to talk about bikes with. And I think at this point, we should just bite the bullet and invite him into the room.
So welcome to the podcast, Alonzo Bodden. So Alonzo, obviously a lot of people know you for comedy in the stand-up world, but you're also an accomplished motorcyclist and something of an enthusiast in the two-wheel world as well.
Lifelong. Yeah, I started riding when I was 18. I had a bike before I had a car, and I'd say maybe 5 years of my life I haven't had a motorcycle. So
what was the first bike when you were 18?
The CB 404 with the beautiful 4-into-1 pipes, the Honda. I had a yellow one.
The Super Sport,
yeah. Always tempted to buy another one when I see them, and then I sit on it and my knees are like, "Are you kidding?"
and for our audience that's listening, you're a relatively tall gentleman, correct?
6'3". Yeah, 6'3". So
Look at that.
I test tall bikes.
Right on. Well, that's a good segue into the first few questions we want to ask you, which is sort of rapid fire, get to know you kind of stuff. And the questions about getting into motorcycling. So you said your first bike was a CB 404.
Yeah.
And what was your draw into motorcycling? Was it a friend? Was it a commercial?
When I was a kid, about 7 years old, my grandmother had a farm in South Carolina, and there was a dirt road from the highway to the house, probably about 2 miles. And there was a family that rented land from her. So their son, I don't know, looking back, it had to be either a Triumph or a BSA. I know it was a twin. and he took us for rides up and down that dirt road. And I'm telling you, from the first time I went on the back of that bike to today, it's the same feeling. I was one time up that road on the back of that motorcycle, whatever it was, I was absolutely hooked.
So we were talking about this in pre-production, and I've gone down a rabbit hole of listening to a lot of your stand-up in preparation for this. And one of the skits that I found on Spotify was Now That's Advertising, where you talk about like the lies that advertisers tell us, and you talk about like the Coors Light train where it's icy and all the girls are in bikinis. Like, do you feel
not just Coors Light, every sports bar commercial has more. It's a sports bar with more women than men. All the women are hot, and they are somehow interested in you and the game. Still looking for that bar. Still looking.
Do you feel like the way that these advertisers have lied to you? Do you feel like motorcycling lied to you? Like, did you get a motorcycle thinking like, this is going to be it now. I'm going to have all the feelings. I'm going to have all the girls chasing me. Like, do you feel like motorcycling was honest with you, or do you feel it lied to you?
1,000% honest. 1,000% honest. And I said this a long time ago in an interview. My favorite place is alone in my helmet. The feeling of riding, and even, in LA, and Zach will tell you about this, riding in LA traffic is playing a live game of Frogger, right? But even that is fun. No, I've always loved riding. I've had a few miserable rides. The worst ride I ever had, going cross country to Americade. I perform at Americade up in Lake George, New York every year. And I rode from LA, and I hit the Jersey Turnpike in a blinding rain and had to ride up the Jersey Turnpike across the George Washington Bridge through the Bronx, Connecticut, into upstate New York. That was the most miserable. I was scared to death. The George Washington Bridge is a metal graded covered bridge that you're riding a motor. Yeah. But at the end of it, I was like, ooh, that was fun. I made it. I'm alive. I'll never do that again. So even a bad ride on a motorcycle is a good ride. The only lie in motorcycling is that if you get a Harley, you can beat everyone up. That's the only lie.
So it doesn't make you any tougher?
No. Which is, we'll probably get into this later, but it's Harley's reputation is their best and worst thing about their brand.
That's a pretty good way to distill that, I would say. Well, I'm curious. Hopefully that does come up later, because I'm curious to dive more into that. But
I'm just excited to go. So my wife is from New Jersey, so I'm excited to go home tonight and over dinner be like, you're never going to guess where the most dangerous place that Alonzo felt uncomfortable. I pick on her all the time from being from the Garden State.
So, how do you spend most of your time riding these days? For those of you that, for those of us that don't.
Well, so I just moved. I moved recently from LA to Vegas. So let's talk about LA, because that's where I spent most of my life riding.
Yep.
I am and was fortunate to live in the San Fernando Valley. My backyard, some of the greatest roads in the world, Mulholland, Topanga, Stunt, Latigo, Bouquet Canyon, all of that, within a half hour of my house, I could be on any of those. So that was the fantastic fun riding. But I'm a commuter. I ride, like, given the choice, I would always ride rather than drive. The only time I drive is when I had to carry stuff, or if I was doing a show or something and I had to dress, slacks or a suit or something like that. Otherwise, gotcha. I ride, and it's always fun. It also saves a ton of time. It saves a ton of time. Commuting in LA is murder. But if you're on a bike, California is the only place you can legally split lanes. And, that changes, right? When you're in your 20s, splitting lane is life-threatening because you're doing it at 80 miles an hour and you're a complete idiot, But as you age, if you're lucky enough to live through your 20s, then you like, oh, let me slow down a little and I'll still be faster. Also, and you guys are too young to know this, but lane splitting has changed. Back in the 80s, cars would get mad at us, and you had to look out for cars sticking their nose in front of you and trying to cut you off while you were splitting lanes. And I don't know how it changed over time, but now they're a lot more tolerant of you splitting lanes, and it's almost like it's not as dangerous. And of course, the greatest way to split lanes is when you get behind a cop. When you get behind a motorcycle cop, it's like the get out of jail free card. Like, yeah, we're flying through.
So it's interesting. I talked to Zach about this a couple times in the podcast. I originally moved to LA in early 2000s. I was a high school teacher out there, and from the time that I originally moved out there, and started splitting lanes, like I felt like people were out to get you. They were edging over to not let you by. And I come back to visit now, and whenever I'm in LA, they're much more respectful. They're moving out of the way.
Yeah, I don't know what changed, but they are. Also, it helps to get a GS Adventure with the engine and gas tank crash bars, because it's like, yeah, I'm ready to fight back. Adventure bikes are the greatest lane splitting bikes.
Right. Because you're looking at lane splitting as an adventure. You're creating your own adventure, basically.
Well, that you're up high, you can get between them, and they have a presence to them.
Yeah.
That people notice them, I think.
I also think BMWs and Harleys are the best lane splitting bikes because they're the ones that are most likely to look like a police bike, and the most likely for people to be like, oh, maybe I'll get out of the way of this bike, because you never know. Though I think you'll appreciate this, Alonzo. I borrowed an actual BMW police bike a couple years ago to do a story on, and people were remarkably oblivious that I was on a bike with lights on. Like, I had blue and red lights on it. It was painted like as a police bike, and I would like ride up next to someone on the 405, and they'd be like looking at their cell phone, and you'd think that people would be spooked because they would know that it was a police bike, but they didn't. So maybe I'm just
because they were looking at their phone, they didn't notice there was any kind of bike.
Right.
Exactly. I had the opposite experience when I worked. My original job when I started comedy, my day job was in transportation for a little show you might have heard of called Power Rangers. Yeah, I was there from the beginning. Yeah, the original Rangers, I knew them and all that. Well, anyway, part of transportation is getting what we call picture cars, right? The cars you use in scenes. And they have police cars that are picture cars, and you have to put a sign over it, like over your doors and stuff, saying not police, and you have to cover your light bar. But it is black and white like a police car. So you'd be on the freeway and people would slow down. And then when you pass and they saw you're not a cop, you'd get the finger. Yeah. 4 out of 5 times you're getting the finger for them slowing down.
Right. So there you are, just trying to do the right thing for the Power Rangers, and you're getting flipped off. Well,
so I would say you talked about cross-country riding. You talked about lane splitting. You talked about, whenever you have an opportunity where you're not wearing a suit and a tie, you're trying to ride. Like, what if you had to pick your favorite type of riding? Just, is it everyday commuting? Is it like a curvy mountain road? Is it a track day? Is it adventure, on-road, off-road? Like, what's your favorite type of riding?
It's changed over the years, because when I was a kid, it was definite. And when I say kid, teens,
you're like
20s,
what, like 30? You're like 35 now, 36.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, something like that. No, when I was young, it was definitely sport bikes, right, and sport bike riding. And it was canyons and the occasional track day, and that was super fun. And then, but I always liked cruisers. So I'll tell you my cruiser story real quick. I started out, I had an Interceptor for a couple of months. That got stolen. Took me a while to get some money up together. Then I bought a CBR 600, went to a CBR 900. So now I'm riding a CBR 900, and this is 94, 5, 6, right in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I go to the Honda dealer, and he showed me a Valkyrie, and he was like, you got to ride this thing, right? This is the original Valkyrie. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, what? I'm not riding that. What is that? That giant thing. I came back laughing. I came back like, oh, I got to have one of these. I got to get one of these. And I had a girlfriend who rode with me on the 900. So about 6, 7 months later, I had a Honda Civic, right? It's my commuter car. And I just went to the Honda dealer. I said, hey, will you take the Civic for the Valkyrie? And he was like, yes, we would. Because they were a car and motorcycle. And I rode home on the Valkyrie. And I never forget, I went to pick her up. I said, you got to see this bike. And she came down and she was like, wow, look at that back seat. Now, the Valkyrie has this giant 6-cylinder engine.
I would
right?
say
A
the
car
Valkyrie engine is
radiator.
probably bigger than your Civic engine, wasn't it?
Right, it was actually made more power. And all she saw, I said, all you see is the back seat, and she was like, "That's the only part I need. I can sleep back there." And that started my love of power cruisers. And I would always have a sport bike and a power cruiser in the garage. So I loved riding those because they're comfortable, but they're still fast. You know, the power cruiser, I had a couple of Valkyries. I've had the Rocket 3. I've had the M109, all of the big boys, Diavels. And by the way, the Diavel is not a power cruiser. It's a big naked bike. It's no way a cruiser. It's a big naked bike, but it's still super fun. So
and
I would say
for our audience listening, the Diavel is the big Ducati. Basically, that's Ducati's version of what a cruiser would look like.
And you had the V twin one, right? Not a V4, right, Alonzo?
Right. I had the V twin. I had a couple of them different years. But anyway, so my riding has changed. Like now, touring is just fun, man. Just getting out. The last few years I've had a dog, so I can't just take off on the trips like I did before. But I still like going out for a few days or just a long, comfortable cruiser ride. So yeah, I mean, the sport bike days, they were fun. I love them. When I see kids on them, I call them kids, young people riding sport bikes. I'm happy for them. I'm like, have a ball. I was on my case. I have a K1600 Grand America, which I know Zach loves that bike.
Yeah.
I've seen Zach's criticism of those bikes. You're wrong. Anyway,
you have to take Zach's criticisms of the bikes that you own with a grain of salt.
As always,
Grain of salt.
as always, yeah.
I'm on Sunset, headed out toward PCH, and these guys are on sport bikes, and they're flying, and I'm doing a pretty good clip. They're not losing me, you know. And I came up on them on a red light, and they were like, "Dude, we thought you were a cop."
Okay.
And I was like, "Nah, man, have fun, you know." Sport bikes are super fun if your knees fold.
So on the topic of bikes you've owned, we did have a question about the last time you bought a new bike, but maybe give the listeners like a quick snapshot of your garage right now. You said you have a K1600B.
Right now, I got a K1600 Grand America, and I have a GS Adventure, and I have an Indian Challenger loaner bike.
Okay.
My history of bike ownerships, I have a serious problem. We could spend the next hour talking about everything I've had.
Right.
Pretty much, you know, everything from a 1098 to a Rocket 3. I've had a few different multi-stratas. I've had the V-twin and the V4. Not a huge fan of the V4. Good, but I like the BMW better. Even though the V4 is faster, the BMW seems to have more presence and a more comfortable ride, which is my preference on that.
You're talking about the GS Adventure over a Multistrada V4.
Right. GS Adventure versus Multistrada V4.
Yeah.
And I've had, like I say, I've had the power cruisers. The M109 was a fantastic bike. I loved it. And a friend of mine totaled my M109, which is really a test of friendship.
Are you still friends?
I forgave him. But I had one of those fat tire ones that they build with the 280 in the back and the 180 in the front. That just massive. There's something about a massive bike like that that's just fun. And he found out he couldn't turn it with the 180 in the front, which he could have told me before, but he made a valiant
but male
attempt.
ego knows no bound, and you can't admit that you can't do something.
So on the topic of Japanese power cruisers, actually, one of the questions we had for you, one of the episodes we did this season was called Moto Blunders Japan. So we've done a few Moto Blunders episodes where we've talked about mistakes that certain markets have made, like, you know, European brand manufacturers. What were some gaffes that they made over the years? American, of course, there's plenty of fodder there. But the one we did this season was Japan. And I'm curious, some people might say, like, if someone was into Suzuki GSXRs or, you know, sport bikes or something like that, they might look at a Japanese cruiser like a Suzuki M199R and say, that's kind of like, why would they even build that bike? But you love that bike. So I'm curious if you have any bikes from Japan that you think are mistakes.
Yeah, the V twins, the Honda, was it VTR or whatever it was? The 1800 V twin Honda did.
Oh,
There's
VTX.
the 1300, the 1800, the VTX.
Right, the VTX. The
Okay.
Kawasaki Vulcan.
Okay.
The Yamaha Raider.
Do you think they were blunders just because
All of
they
those.
tried to go after what Harley Davidson was doing?
Right. That's why they were mistakes, because they tried to make what Harley was making. The M109 is different because, Zach, it's exactly what you said. It's like, I had a GSXR. I'm older now, but I still want to ride. Really, that's the M109 audience. The M109 audience is the Gixxer and Busa guys who moved to a cruiser. And that bike is different because they put the sport bike front end on it.
And it's liquid
They put
cooled.
the 4 valve per cylinder. It's
Right.
a high revving V-twin. It's not trying to be a Harley. The Japanese bikes that tried to be Harleys were all mistakes.
Well, it's interesting because that was kind of some of the conversation that we had in the episode. I want to pause for 1 second because Zach got really excited and jumped in, and I just want to take a moment and announce to the audience that's listening how we normally walk through this. So if you're listening to the season finale for the first time, what we try to do is we try to take our guest throughout the entire season. So we're going to go through the episodes and kind of throw questions at you, Alonzo, that we addressed in each of the episodes as we go through this. Zach has jumped in with episode 2 of the season with some of the motorcycle blunders. I want to back up for 1 second because you talked about what your garage looks like right now. And I think that's exciting. The first episode we did this year was about the bikes that we're releasing and which ones we were most excited about. So my question for you is, if you could go out and buy any new bike out there right now that you don't already have in your garage, what bike would you add to your garage and why?
Man, you are asking the killer question right now. I talked to Zach briefly about this. So Americade, giant touring rally upstate New York, and all the demos come there. And people from Harley were telling me, you got to ride the CVO ST Road Glide. They were like, you have to check this bike out. You have to check. All the new Harleys surprised me. Everyone I rode, I was somewhere between surprised and shocked. Okay. The CVO Road Glide ST is the bike. That's the basis for their Battle of the Baggers race bike. Bike's incredible. Fast, good handling, incredible brakes. Like it truly is a giant V-twin sport bike, right? I mean, it just works. And
it's only like 45 grand, Alonzo. What's stopping you from?
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Now,
you should get 2.
This is the other thing. Well, that's the hitch, that it's 40. I think the sticker on it's 43, and I heard the dealers are getting like 50 for it.
Whew.
Well, the other bike that I really love are the Indians, the Pursuit in particular, the full dress Indian,
Right.
because that also has a hot rod V-twin motor. And the thing about the Indian, for me, I'm taller, it's more comfortable, it's actually bigger. Of course, with Harley, there's 10,000 aftermarket parts, so you can make it fit, right? I think when you buy a Harley, you're going to drop $5,000 making it yours right after you buy it. But it's incredible the options you have because of all the aftermarket. So in answer to your question, I can't decide which of those 2 bikes I would buy if I were buying a bike tomorrow. And I don't think I'd be wrong with either one. I think I'm leaning more toward the Pursuit, though. The Pursuit is more comfortable and can do more things. But riding a Harley that's that fast, it's one of those you're laughing in your helmet because it's ridiculous what that bike could do.
Also,
Is that when you said it surprised you? Was it just like you weren't expecting that performance out of it?
Yeah, I wasn't. I mean, listen, Harley Davidson is not known for performance bikes, right? And this is getting back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, the new Harleys are fantastic, right? It's kind of funny that 4 valves per cylinder is this new technology. We joined the 80s. But they make it work within the brand, and then you have those old Harley guys that, like, that's not a real Harley. Like, that's the worst thing. That kills them. That their customer base says that to any advancement. Like, oh, the brakes work? That's not a real Harley. Like, yeah, they're called Brembo brakes. They're the best brakes in the world. They're used on all, high performance vehicles, and they work. So it's a super high performance bike. I think they'll approve of it because it's a road glide. It's not a different thing. But wow, what a bike! But yeah, I mean, and the 42,000, it's a lot of money. But when it comes to finish and paint, Harley is the best. It's beautifully painted. And the resale value on them, you don't take that hit. You take a smaller hit, right? If you have a 2-year-old Harley versus a 2-year-old anything else, the resale is much higher on the Harley as a percentage. So if you pay 42, you ride it for a couple of years, you get 35 for it, or 38, or maybe you get 45, depending on what it is. You know what I mean? So that's the other issue. So. Yeah. I don't know. It's a tough call, but I'm leaning toward Indian.
It kind of sounds like Indians buttering your bread a little bit too. You said you got an Indian loaner in your garage right now, so
well, Harley's offered me the same thing.
Okay,
we
all
just
right.
couldn't. But the Harley marketing guy, we couldn't make it work because that was a brand new bike, and all the industry guys, Zach, had those bikes, so
I see.
Enthusiasts couldn't have them. All the journalists, Zach had.
I see.
Spurg, Triumph invited me on a bike launch, and Zach saw me at the airport, and his first question was, "Alonzo, what are you doing here?"
Hey, that's not fair. I don't think that was my first question.
That sounds exactly like sometimes I show up and Zach says to me, "What are you doing here?" I'm like,
"What are you doing here?"
I belong here. He's very highbrow with who he wants to associate with.
The gatekeeper. He's the gatekeeper.
No, not even. I just thought you wouldn't bring it up for years to come, but obviously I was wrong.
So the important thing is both Harley Davidson and Indian are buttering your bread, and you're just sitting back and enjoying it.
No, I mean, it's a great fight, right? It's a great fun fight. I'm like, no, I haven't decided yet. Let me borrow that one. No, I was very surprised by the modernization and loved the modernization of Harley Davidson. But one of the things that comes with Harley, right, is the culture. And that's a tough one. It's a tough one. I've said for years, this is how great a brand Harley Davidson is, right? It's the only brand that both white supremacists and black people swear by. There's nothing else. There's nothing else that does that. There's nothing else that does that. You see a white supremacist and a black guy arguing road glide versus street glide. You're like, my head just exploded, but...
It's kind of like the Toyota Tacomas with like the Taliban only uses Toyota Tacomas because like they were incredibly reliable, and like all the people in America are like, no, it's just a great pickup truck. It's
it's a weird thing, but that whole culture, I'm not into it. Like, I don't want to be like, I don't have to show anybody I'm a tough guy. I don't want open pipes. Open pipes annoy people, right? There's nothing good about open pipes and stuff. So that part of it, and when you buy a Harley, you're kind of like, they just figure you're into that, Now, don't get me wrong. I've been to the Biker Roundup and I've seen the custom road glides the brothers build. They are incredible. They are absolutely in the most beautiful, again, just incredibly beautiful. I don't know where you're riding with a 26-inch front wheel, but it looks good.
As long as you don't hit a pothole, you're fine.
Exactly. I think if they hit a pothole, they buy a new bike. I don't know how that works.
You just leave the bike next to the pothole and move on to the next thing.
That one's trash. I'm going to go get another one.
Okay. So
what do you guys think about that? What do you think about? And when I say the Harley culture, I mean let's call it the Sons of Anarchy culture.
Right. I don't know. Spurg, do you have a quick answer?
I just had this conversation with my wife recently. My wife is in the motorcycle industry as well. She had used to work for Triumph Motorcycles, but she was a big fan of Sons of Anarchy because I think like the guy with the blonde hair that was the cute actor. I think she had a little bit of a crush on him. I always just had a problem with like the way that portrayed motorcycles, and we recently had this debate about the Bike Riders movie that's coming out, and like the motorcycles being associated with the violence and the gangs. And I think we have such a hard time as a collective minority as motorcyclists trying to get people in cars to not look at us all the same. That I guess if I had to say, my only opinion there is that like I'm more worried about preserving motorcycling as a whole, and any kind of negative image, kind of blankets all of us a little bit at times, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was gonna cite something that my dad said on the sort of recent Father's Day episode we did, where he said something like, to him motorcycles aren't not necessarily a lifestyle. It's just something he likes to do, and he doesn't feel like it needs to define him. And I think that's the part of that culture, to answer your question, Alonzo, that like always rubs me the wrong way a little bit. It's like, well, if you want to be a part of this, then you have to not be something else. And I don't really like that attitude. I like, to me, motorcycles are too broad a swath of culture to be narrowed down to that one thing, So like, if people are into it, I think it's okay, as long as they're not doing violence, as Spurgeon said.
Yeah, well, the actual violent part, that is the 1%. I mean, most of them are harmless.
Yeah, totally,
They're
totally.
harmless, right? They just want to dress up that way.
Right.
But it turns off, sort of like what Spurge was saying, it turns off other people. And because here in the United States, when you say motorcycle to someone who doesn't ride, they think Harley. Like,
right.
That is the American definition of a motorcycle and all that goes with it. And I think even Harley Davidson is trying to broaden their appeal, right? But that's what I talk about. But then you get those people telling you that that's not a real Harley. So you can't, like, how do you fight against your own customers saying that? And then the other thing that's really funny about it, getting back to the broad picture of motorcycle. Listen, the greatest advertising of all time, you meet the nicest people on a Honda. That was such a brilliant way to say, we're not Harley. That's what they were saying. We're not tough guy. We're not leather.
Right.
We're not dangerous to your daughter, right? You meet the nicest people. And everybody at Yamaha was walking around, nicest people. Nobody thought of that. Nobody could think of that at Yamaha. Nicest people, huh? Honda? Brilliant advertising. And then Honda made the Grom, right? And I had a Grom. Everyone had a Grom. It was the greatest seller. I talked to somebody in marketing at Honda once, and he said, why can't we make an iconic bike, right? Because he was talking about Ducati Island at MotoGP.
Uh-huh.
And I said, Honda has two icons, the Goldwing and the Grom.
Yeah, I think
those are only two Hondas you identify right away as Honda, and this is great.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question and kind of pivot, because I think we could probably, it sounds like we could probably kind of digest an entire podcast episode just around some of the culture within that Harley world. And I think you bring up a lot of great points, but pivoting to the Honda point that you were just making. So, you talked about being 17, 18 years old and seeing, you had a neighbor Triumph, I'm assuming classic lines of like a 70s Triumph. So you grew up in an era where like...
No, that's when I was 7 or 8 years old.
7 or 8,
not 17, 8. That's when I was a little kid, yeah.
Okay. But my point, like the motorcycle was like the classic image of like a 60s or 70s motorcycle. And we had done an episode for 3 about, how classics are how classic is a modern classic. We've seen this over the past 10 or 15 years where they're making motorcycles look older. And, my question for you as someone that was influenced, in an era of these classic images of motorcycling, how do you feel about the modern era kind of hearkening back to some of these earlier designs? Is it something that you like and appreciate, or is it something that you feel might be a little bit fraudulent to represent what the bikes were originally?
I think it's great because they work, right? So if you've got a new Triumph Bonneville and it looks like a Bonneville, but it has all the modern features, which makes it fun, easy, and safer to ride, go for it. Listen, Mike Seat, my friend at Cafe Racer, he's breaking his foot kick-starting stuff. I'm like, yeah, we got buttons for that now. We got a button that makes that work.
But none of the bikes in your garage have been these bikes though, right? Have you ever had a Ducati Sport Classic or a Bonneville or anything like that?
Yeah, I did. Oh, thanks for reminding me of one of the dumbest things I ever did, Zach. So when Ducati came out with the Sport Classics, right? I bought the Cafe Racer one. You know, the low bars.
Yellow or red?
Yellow, the yellow one, right? Just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, and this is when I'm still in my sport bike days, right? So 6 or 8 months later, they come out with the 1098. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to have a 1098. So I traded in my Sport Classic. Now let's jump ahead 3 or 4 years where they're worth double what they cost new.
I was gonna interrupt you. So what did you trade it in for versus like what did you see them?
I traded it in for a 1098. The 1098 was new and it was fast and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
So I traded in the Sport Classic for a 1098 and nobody told me, oh, you should have held on to the Sport Classic for 4 more years. You could have doubled your money. Now
I don't think anyone knew. They were sitting left over on the dealership floors. They couldn't give them away for like $8,000, and then all of a sudden, and so we'll pause for the audience. The Sport Classic was a motorcycle Ducati made from around 2007 to around 2009. Short-lived. It kind of looked like a Triumph Thruxton at the time period. That's kind of what they were going after. And they couldn't sell them.
Well, no. I think they were going after older Ducatis. They were going after, like they had the Paul Smart version, because I think they were going after that early 70s Ducati look.
Right.
I think it was that cafe image, and at the time, the only other bike that was doing that was like the Triumph Thruxton. So I guess from a competitor's standpoint, but I agree with you. I think trying to harken back to their heritage, the way Triumph was.
So you got burned that time, Alonzo, and now no more modern classics for you. No more sport classics. No more bundles.
It was just that one. But you know what bike I've always loved? I've always loved the classic. I think it's a ZRX, which is like the.
Oh yeah.
It looks like the Kawasaki Superbike racers from the 80s.
Yeah.
I've always thought that's a beautiful bike. Honda is trying to redo the original Honda 750, but it doesn't look like the original. It looks like a modern version of the original. I think it would be even better if they made it more retro, because now when you look back at that original Honda 750, that was a beautiful bike. Beautiful bike.
You're talking about the CB1100, sort of like modern CB1100. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. It does have like it sort of has a little bit of like modern fat on its bones. Doesn't have that kind of like raw, pure quality.
It's almost like, no, this is too modern. Make it look like the old bike and just put the modern engine in the old bike, which is what the Kawasaki looks like. Kawasaki looks like the 80s, race bike, which was a great look.
Okay, so last question on this topic. Would you consider yourself, Alonzo Bodden, a modern classic? Are you?
Oh no, I'm an old guy. No, man.
So you're a kickstart. You're a kickstart guy.
No, but I embrace being an old guy. Like I remember stuff, and now I ride big, comfortable bikes. Because when you're in your 20s and 30s, maybe even 40, and you see guys riding touring bikes around the city, as a commuter, you're like, what the hell you doing on that big? Then you hit your 50s and you're like, man, this is comfortable, man. I like this. This works, So, and you're at 25, a windshield is like, you're crazy, right? At 55, you're like, wait, the seat's not heated? What are you, an animal? What are you, a beast? I'm not riding that thing.
Well, speaking, just for a quick side tangent of, you mentioned old guys. I saw you on an episode with Jay Leno in his garage, and I guess, out of the car, it was an episode where you were blindfolded, and he was making you try to guess engines. Yeah. And we're going to do with you an engine sound guessing game of our own in a minute here. But as an opportunity to be in Jay Leno's garage, was there one motorcycle that stood out to you that if you could steal it from his garage and put it in yours, that was like the one you remember the most?
I don't know. I mean, obviously the jet bike would be something to ride, but I don't know that I'd want to own one. Jay's garage is so full of everything, Jay's a very interesting guy because he still loves sport bikes and sport riding, but he has these classic, like he just bought a collection of Bros Superiors a couple of years ago, and he bought 10 or 15 of them from some collector, and he has all of them, Jay would call me for the show whenever he had a funny or crazy motorcycle to ride or a motorcycle event. I think the craziest and most fun we did the 2-wheel drive Urals with the sidecar, and there's no differential, right? So when you put it in 2-wheel drive, the wheels turn at the same speed, so you can't turn. It just plows ahead. And we took them to a motocross track and did laps, and it was hilarious and fun. And Jay would do that. I would joke with him. I'd be like, so I see you call, Fishburne when you're testing the new BMW M whatever. And he's like, well, yeah, Jay's like, yeah, well, he stars in movies. You just do comedy. He's like, oh, okay, I understand.
So you get the Ural, you get the old Russian motorcycle.
I get the Ural, and
Right.
we did a bike that somebody built that had a Traeger grill on the side. So we literally rode around and cooked hamburgers while we were riding. Hilarious, fun, super fun.
So, speaking of a-holes like Spurgeon Dunbar, we did an episode this season. Episode 5 was called Am I the A-Hole Moto Edition, which was basically a collection of scenarios in which people were wondering if they were the a-hole in the situation. And they sent us in a bunch of things we chewed over. So, Alonzo, we have one for you. It has to do with motorcycles, sort of. You're going to have to bear with us here for a minute. Chris wrote in via email and says, quote, "My neighbor puts food and water out for the animals of the forest that live nearby. He feeds the squirrels, the birds, the raccoons, and then, of course, rats and mice. These animals like to nest inside the air boxes of my motorcycles, and I use the insulation from the car's firewall to make their nests. I open up my air boxes and I find peanut shells, dog food, sunflower seeds, and nests of rodents. I asked my neighbor to stop doing this because it's ruining my property, and he told me I should call an exterminator. So now I put poison out to kill the animals that he is constantly feeding. Who is the a-hole in this situation? Is it the neighbor or is it Chris via email?"
Ooh, that's a tough one. I was with Chris right up until the poisoning. And no, I'll tell you why. Because poisoning poisons the food chain and it kills other animals.
I see. So if you're poisoning a rat and then the rat gets eaten by something, then that thing is poisoned.
Right. And
Okay.
that's the negative. So I got to tell you, in my wide and varied experience, I worked with this guy, Jeremy, and Jeremy was the, quote, critter catcher to the stars. And this is the guy, people who live in the foothills of California have all these snakes, raccoons, skunks, whatever, living under their house or whatever. He's the guy you call because he knows how to trap and capture all of these. And he always said, the worst thing that can happen is have a neighbor feed them, because now these animals know there's a food source. They're never going to go away. They're just going to keep coming, right? They learn that's easy food. So I would say that neighbor was the a-hole, but the poisoning is bad because it poisons the food chain. So I think they're both a-holes, and they kind of deserve each other. No, I think the neighbor has to stop feeding. Anyone who works with wildlife will tell you shouldn't be feeding wildlife. You just shouldn't.
Okay.
You attract them, and it shouldn't be.
Well, it sounds like Chris, Alonzo says that you are a little bit of an a-hole, but not as big an a-hole as your neighbor for feeding the animals. I think that's a fair assessment.
And I think it's a fair answer to keep PETA off your back. So you're not going to have to worry about PETA protesting any of your upcoming shows. It's good. Yeah. It's friendly.
There are a lot of, there's a lot of ways to get rid of animals without poisoning them. Usually noise. They don't like noise. And there are certain frequencies and stuff. And there are people who know this. You can put these noise things in your garage or your barn, and it gets rid of them. Except raccoons. Raccoons are the only ones they're hard to get rid of because they're really smart.
Did any of you high side, low side listeners expect to learn stuff like this today? You came here for playful banter about motorcycles, and Alonzo's teaching you about extermination and how to get rid of animals. It's incredible.
In a loving way too. Just blast
exactly.
your horn
No
at
poison.
them. Yeah.
A wide variety of useless knowledge. That's what I've
Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break to get in a word from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back and finish up our discussion with Alonzo and play the engine sound guessing game. All right, so we are back from the break. Again, thanks to Motool for all they do. So moving on, episode 6, we had an opportunity to sit down with Peter Egan, who is a classic motorcycle journalist, a personal hero of mine. And as Zach and I were preparing for this episode, really, our question for you is, what big influences or personal heroes did you have in the motorcycling world, if any? And did you get a chance to meet them ever or talk to them or have them influence you?
I don't know if I'd use the word influence. I mean, obviously meeting Kenny Roberts, that's a legend to meet him. So let's see, who else have I met? I could say Leno, in a way. I mean, but that's just, it's different than meeting a legend.
Because he's not legendary?
Well, no, because I know him from both worlds, right? I know him from the comedy world, and then the gearhead world just was an offshoot from that, It's hard. That's a tough answer. So I'd have to say Kenny Roberts. I'll tell you the most fun I had with, and I don't know if he's an icon, but I got to watch a MotoGP race with Ben Spies. It was a Moto2 race at Coda. And to hear him talk, to talk you through a lap having done it and what they're thinking and that it was, it was the greatest commentary I ever had on a race. Like I learned more about getting through a lap and what the racers are thinking and the elbowing and the fighting and all of that stuff. It was very cool. If you ever get a chance to sit with a MotoGP rider and watch a moto race, do it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And for those of you who don't know, Ben Spies is an American MotoGP racer, world superbike champion, and American superbike champion. And yeah, that seems like it would be. I feel like that's the kind of thing that you can only get from a few people, whatever the sport is. If you go to any kind of stick and ball sport or motorsports or something like that, if you talk to someone who's played it or done it at a really high level, you get a pretty special viewpoint on all that. Now, I noticed, Alonzo, you didn't mention any really cool journalists that you met on a Triumph trip to Portugal at all. Did you want to bring that up?
There weren't any.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough.
Peter Jones wasn't there, and that's my guy. So,
right on. Fair enough.
I was actually going to pay Zach a compliment. The first time that I went to MotoGP with Zach was like going to MotoGP for the first time, because Zach is such a incredible enthusiast when it comes to MotoGP that like he had all these fun little facts and things that he was sharing with me, and I was like, wow, this is like going to MotoGP again for the first time. So I was gonna.
Well, also, I mean, Zach, you're also a racer. You're not just a writer or just a fan. You've actually been out there, and anyone who's done something, you got to respect it more. Right. Just because now, like, we have this culture of the talking heads. Right. So you have these people in sports. You talk about sports. They talk all this crap, but they've never played. They've never been under the pressure. They've never been in that situation.
Right.
So whenever you get to talk to someone who's done it. Now, the fun thing about racing and riding a motorcycle is you can do a track day and get your time and see how incredibly slow you are. Like, you thought you were slow, but when you have an actual time that it took you to get around the track compared to the time it took them to get around the track, you realize, there's a bit of a difference. Matter of fact, they could have stopped for coffee in turn 10 and then got back on the bike and still beat you.
And to be clear, you have we've been talking about Harleys and Indians and BMW GSs, but you said you had a sport bike phase, and you just talked about 1098 Ducati that you owned. You had a track day phase of your life, right? You did some. Did you ever actually race?
Yeah, no, I never raced, but I did track days, and the fun thing about my 1098, right, good and bad. So I high-sided my 1098 at Buttonwillow, and I don't know who writes on Wikipedia, but somebody wrote this fantastic story about me being a Ducati motorcycle racer who crashed in a race. And now, mind you, I am more than twice the size of a typical MotoGP rider. Okay, literally, So I was so flattered by this. And I think the best thing about shattering my arm at that time was I went to a superbike race. And John Hopper was there, and he had broken his wrist. So I have a picture of both of us holding our arms up with the casts on, which is the only thing I had in common with him. But the upside of crashing the 1098, my friend Nick Anglada, a builder down in Florida, built the most incredible Street Fighter out of my 1098.
That's where that custom came from?
Show bike. Yeah, that's where that came from.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you
I literally high-sided, and he asked me, how's the bike? He did not ask how I was doing. He said, well, how's the bike? Send it to me. And I'll, that was it.
well,
I remember you making a joke in one of the video clips that I watched about how you were doing a walkthrough of your garage, and you were like, yeah, and the Ducati's not here because it's an Italian sport bike, so it's in the garage where it's getting worked on.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
well, that's actually, I mean, that's a real glass half full attitude. I'd like to say that you can tell you're a true motorcyclist, not just from all your knowledge, but the fact that you crashed at a track day, and your takeaway is sort of like, I got a picture with John Hopkins. It was pretty cool, and I got a custom bike out of it. So really just sort of like lose then win,
Yeah.
which I appreciate that. And frankly, a good segue to our next question and topic, which was episode 7 of this season, which was a discussion about whether or not motorcycles can have too much horsepower. And considering you have high-sided a Ducati at a racetrack, it occurs to me that perhaps even while you were in the air during that high side, you were questioning if that bike had too much horsepower. So what's your answer right now if we were to ask you? Are there bikes with too much power? And where would you draw the line?
And well, I'll tell you, the new leader bikes, they're too fast to be fun. There's
I love this. Preach. Keep talking.
I'm going to be generous and say 5% of the bike population could ride those in anger. That's being generous. Mm-hmm. They're 200 horsepower bikes. They're super small. They're literally physically smaller and lighter. You can annihilate any speed limit in first gear, and you could do 100 miles an hour in second gear. And it's just not fun. That thing about it's more fun to ride a slow bike fast than a fast bike slow is absolutely true. Now, the stunters are a whole different thing, and I'm not anti-stunter. Have fun. What they do is definitely a skill and amazing, maybe not do it on the freeway during rush hour, but who am I to judge? But they went from super bikes to hyper bikes, right? Weren't they calling them hyper bikes for a minute? And I'm specifically talking about the Gixxers, the R1s, the stuff like that. Because even the Hayabusa and the bikes like that, like they're different because they're heavier and they have that torque, which they can be fun to ride on the street at less than 180 miles an hour. But the new, and again, you can call me old guy or whatever, but I've ridden them. It's not that much fun to be on a bike that is so fast with such a hair trigger. It's like riding a thoroughbred horse, it always wants to go and you can't go there's nowhere to go. So,
it always wants to go and there's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go. It's like having
maybe
a thoroughbred on one of those, those trail rides, those horse rides, where you think you're riding the horse, but the horse has done it so much, he knows what he's doing. He's like, whatever, tap me on the neck, right? I'm going to make a left here, I'm going to gallop this far, and then we're going to walk back. The horse already knows, okay? So you can bring a thoroughbred, no.
Do you think that's, you started off this conversation earlier talking about how excited you were for some of the new Harley Davidson and Indian models. And I think for our audience that's listening that might not recognize this, while those are bigger V-twins, a lot of the power there is in the torque and in the usability and the mid-range. Do you think that, knowing how you ride, like you gravitate a little bit more towards some of that oomph versus that like top end, 200 mile?
And that's also an age thing. And seriously, I mean, I've done it, right? I've had the high horsepower. What I'm saying is that even if you're a sport bike person, if you're a young sport bike person, I say young, I shouldn't even say young. If you're a sport bike person, they're so fast that it's not fun because you're not good enough to push it anywhere near its limit. So it's to have a bike that's 80% of that you could really ride, it's more fun than being on something with a hair trigger that's super fast. That's going to scare the hell out of you. It's going to scare the hell out of you if you hit full throttle on any of these new leader bikes. They're race bikes of 5 years ago or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and you just don't need it. And if you go to a track school and you get to ride with a pro, they'll show you. They'll get on some random bike and smoke you around the track. You could be on the latest hyper leader bike, and they're gonna. There's a guy who rides up in the canyons, Danny Cole. I don't know if you know him, Zach.
Yeah.
Danny rides the what's it, the Honda, that V twin 650 they made for a while
The
back
Honda
in
Hawk?
the late 80s, early, yeah. And just kills kids. Like, it's fun for him, right? He used to be a 250 GP racer.
Yeah.
It's fun for him to take his Honda Hawk, and you're on a new Gixxer 1000, and he breaks your heart, and you don't. And then he takes his helmet off, and he's older than your dad. Danny's a badass.
Yeah, word. Well, that's music to my ears. I love hearing it from another voice, because I just did a review of a Yamaha R1, a Daily Rider video, and I was talking about I was in this sort of like twisty road section of my Daily Rider route that I do. And I was kind of like, this is where you think this bike would be good, right? This is where everyone will tell you that a Yamaha R1 is so good, like on a twisty road. And like, it works well to go through curves. But the truth is, by the time the bike is being exercised to any degree of its capability, you probably shouldn't be doing what you're doing on a public road. And so, if you're going to go to a track day, then it's great. But otherwise, it's probably a little too much. So I'm
even at a track day, Alonzo, to kind of give you insight into where Zach and I landed on that episode. I think Zach and I both kind of landed around like 80 or 90 horsepower is, where we would, even as people that have ridden motorcycles for quite a while now, like that's kind of where we found our sweet spot as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I know a few track day junkies that can ride those bikes, but like I say, they're track day junkies. They do,
Right.
at least 2 track days a month, and have been for years, and they're really expert riders. They're the front of the A group. They're those guys. They're the ones who can exploit those bikes. At best, I was in the middle of the B group, so I got no need for one of those.
Firm intermediate rider here. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I love that. So
well, yeah, not to keep bringing it back to your unfortunate crash, Alonzo, but it is yet again a good segue to episode 8, of our season, which was the latest and greatest in moto safety, where we talked about high-tech motorcycle helmets. We talked about airbags. We talked about the different sort of like levels of gear and safety that you can have on a motorcycle. And I guess our question for you is, are you a all the gear all the time kind of rider? Are you an ATGAT guy? Are you a little bit more casual with it? Do you feel like your tastes have evolved in safety gear over the years?
I'm going to be honest and tell you I'm not an ATGAT guy. Although
fair.
I agree with it. I don't practice it. I don't, but I usually wear a jacket with some armor in it, most of the time. Always wear a helmet, always wear gloves. A friend of mine had a horrible accident recently, and he had all the gear on, and almost lost his leg, and his foot got split open, and his skin grafts. I mean, he had his boots on and leather and stuff, and it's just one of those really bad crashes. Wear the best gear you can afford. Save money somewhere else. Get a real helmet. Get a real jacket. I did have an experience where cheaper gear failed, even though I had it on. And so I'm a big believer in get the best gear you can afford and wear it,
Yeah, that's fair. I think save money somewhere else is a good motto in general, especially as we talk about how you don't need all that horsepower. You're not as good a rider as you think you are, so on and so forth. I think that's a pretty good message.
Well, I know a guy, he has an airbag suit, and for some reason he wasn't wearing it, or he didn't have the airbag turned on or something like that, and he broke his collarbone at a track day, and everybody was like, well, what? He said, I didn't think I was going that fast, I was just warming up. And it's like, dude, that's the worst, to actually have it on and not have it, not use it. But I mean, we all make dumb mistakes, right? The biggest cause of injury is our head.
Yeah. Right. Well said.
Well, speaking of saving money somewhere else, episode 9, we talked about best used bikes for sale. And we each went through Craigslist ads in our neighborhoods and picked out like screaming deals on used bikes. We talked about the Ducati that you sold, and you probably wish you would have held on to it for a few more years before letting it go. But what was the best deal that you ever got on a motorcycle? Was there a standout?
You are so not talking to a best deal guy. the best used bike to buy is just follow me around, because whatever new bike I buy, I'm going to get bored, okay, and I'm going to sell it dirt cheap and lose my whatever on it. So yeah, just follow me around. You're going to get a really nice, clean, late model bike at an incredible discount. All right, I'm that idiot. But the fortunate thing is, whenever I go to the dealership, I see others, and there are guys who have the sickness worse than me. Those are my best friends.
Well, they probably love to see you coming in, because they're like, we're going to get this guy on a great trade-in. Yeah.
They know us all. They love us. I don't. I said this as I briefly sold cars. I bought a lot of toys over the years, this and that. If you can afford it and you love it, you got a good deal. Because anything you buy, doesn't matter what you buy. You could buy a Panigale for $8,000 and somebody, oh man, you should have called me. My cousin just sold one for $5,000. There's always going to be that person who tells you they could have got a better deal. So don't tell anyone what you paid for it. Just ride it and have fun.
I like that.
Yeah. That's a good attitude. I like it. Do you have a biggest regret of a bike you've ever bought? Did you ever buy a bike and think like, I shouldn't have got this one?
The shortest I owned a bike, 3 days.
Woo! That's pretty damning. Do you want to point fingers? What was it?
Suzuki Bandit. I bought a Suzuki.
Okay.
What is it? The Bandit 1200.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it made the incredible sin of being a boring motorcycle. Mm-hmm. It was boring. And I traded it for a speed triple after 3 days. It cost me probably about $1,000 a day to own that thing. And I had absolutely no regrets. No regrets, because the speed triple was so much fun. It was neon green, and the triple is such a great engine, the torque of a twin and the speed, but again, I mean, I was fortunate. Listen, I was making good money at the time, and I could take that hit. Most people couldn't,
Right.
And I get that. Like, I'm blessed in that I have the income and I don't have a family, right? So there's nothing for me to do but help motorcycle salesmen pay their, for their kids to go to private school.
Right.
So,
Did you not?
One, the other regret, BMW RT, and Zach warned me about this. I didn't listen to Zach. I sold my GS.
You're giving him a hell of an ego right now. You gotta reel this in.
I sold my GS and I bought an RT. I don't know if you remember when I talked to you about this. They had this beautiful sort of matte white RT that they made, which is and every time I go to the dealer, I say it was beautiful, beautiful, and I didn't like that bike at all. Didn't like it at all. So.
Right. I don't remember the advice I gave you, but I feel like you've kicked me in the shins a few times on this podcast, so I'll take a compliment where I can get it. And and I think you have a GS in your garage now, so you resettled back in the GS train, which I think is like
I went through 5 different bikes to get back on a GS. It's the greatest all around bike I've ever ridden.
All right, fair enough.
When you talked about the Bandit and you talked about it, its biggest sin was that it was a boring motorcycle. Kind of a thought here, did you get a chance to ride it ahead of time? Like, a lot of the critiques that we get from our listeners is, the struggles of not being able to test ride a motorcycle. So for someone like yourself, you have a lot of relationships with dealers. It sounds like you go back and you buy multiple bikes. You have a long history. Did you get a chance to test ride that bike ahead of time, or did you buy it blind?
Honestly, I don't remember. I think I bought it blind. I think I did. I honestly don't remember.
But then again, riding a Bandit might have been a little bit forgettable anyway, so maybe you did.
Yeah. And a lot of people love their Bandits, and I remember I bought it because it was a real popular cafe bike. People were building a lot of cafe racers. It was in that era. But I rode it and I was like, this thing is not, it works, right? It works, but it's not fun. And no disrespect to people who love them. Good for you. Have fun with it. But it just wasn't for me. It's like the RT. Like, there are BMW people who swear by the RT. The RT is the greatest thing ever made, and they ride 1 million miles on them. And good for you. I'll take a K bike over an RT any day of the week.
This is why I like hanging out with Alonzo. I'm always preaching the K bike thing, and they're coming out. I love it. So yeah, it is very interesting to me that you brought up the Bandit as sort of like a bike that you owned. That was the shortest amount of time you ever owned a bike, and you sort of you damned it for being boring. Because the Bandit 1200 I think is genuinely a good motorcycle, but it's hard to argue that it's exciting. And I think that's like says a lot about your motorcycling personality and kind of acumen, which I appreciate.
I'll give you a quick story of regret. My first Valkyrie, which was I think a '98, the second year it came out. I rode that for a couple of years, and I traded it for a Blackbird. And
CB 1100X?
Yeah, CBR 1100.
Which is a great bike. Mm-hmm. But I changed my mind, and I went back a couple of days later, and the dude was like, oh, we sold that Valkyrie same day. We sold that thing as soon as we reconditioned, because the Valkyrie was such a unique, badass, great bike. They were like, yeah, we sold that right away, so. But the Blackbird was a great bike, too. The Blackbird was fun.
On the topic of Honda Valkyries, real quick, you actually owned a Honda Rune, didn't you? Am I remembering that right?
Yes, I did.
The Few, the Proud. So if you don't know what a Honda Rune is, it was a very striking Honda cruiser from early 2000s, I think. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And had a wacky front end, but it was basically the Goldwing / Valkyrie powertrain, right? The engine and chassis. Right. Okay.
Well, it was the only Valkyrie that used the 1800 motor. That was the big difference with it. So let me back up again, because this was it was a marketing thing. Well, I had my Valkyrie, right? And I'm a big proponent. I love it. And Honda did they made 3 versions of the Valkyrie. They made like a drag bike, like a power muscle bike version, and they made the Rune, which was the cruiser version. And they invited a bunch of us Valkyrie and Goldwing owners to Honda in Torrance, and they had this secret thing, and we had to pick which one we like, what features we like, this or that, right? And then about 2 or 3 years later, they came out with the Rune. Now, I bought the Rune because I love Valkyries. Like, the minute they mentioned it, I was at my dealer with a check, and he was like, I knew you were coming, and I put my deposit down. And I got it. And phenomenal bike, but I'll tell you, this is why I got rid of the Valkyrie. It was impossible to keep clean. I'm not a cleaning guy. I'm not a chrome guy, polishing, sitting in the driveway.
Right.
I want to ride it. Every time you rode it, you hit a puddle, you hit water. The entire front end was made of chrome, and it was an exposed front end, right?
Yeah, it was like a leading link or trailing link front end or something, like wacky bunch of arms and stuff.
Chrome wheels.
Yeah,
it was magnificent, but you had to clean it all the time.
Wasn't it like the brake calipers were chrome? Like
everything was
on
chrome.
it. Yeah.
The chrome was chrome.
Yeah.
The grips were chrome. I'm telling you, everything was chrome. Triumph came out with the Rocket 3. I was like, done. And it's the Rocket 3, the original Rocket 3, which I had 05, first year. The only bike that could out Valkyrie the Valkyrie was the original Rocket 3.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you listening, that was an inline 3 engine that was like 2,100 cc's?
2,300, I think?
2.3 liters.
Yeah.
2,300. The biggest you could get. And I rode the new Rocket. I had one of those for a year. They over-refined it.
Oh, not raw enough?
In my opinion. Not raw enough. They were looking at the Diavel, and they did a great job, and it's very much refined, but it lost that like... I used to get mad. They'd call the original Rocket 3 a tractor, and it was like, no, it's just too much of everything. And you want to talk about torque and that big, 240 rear tire, and that everything about that bike was huge and heavy and steel. And you'd ride up to a Harley and be like, oh, that's cute.
I remember
when Harley guys asked me to race, I asked them, which spark plug do you want me to disconnect?
I was working at a Triumph dealership at the time, and I was riding. My car was a Mazda 3 hatchback, and it had a 2.3 liter in it. And I'd always joke that like this Triumph Rocket 3 had the same size engine that was in a 4-door sedan of a car that would get me and 4 of my buddies around. So like for those of you listening, like this is just a massive engine in a motorcycle.
Fun bike.
Yeah, it's
fun bike.
It's one of those bikes I'm always tempted to buy another one.
Interesting. Moving right along here. I mentioned this earlier. We did a Father's Day episode that aired not too long ago, where we interviewed our dads and talked about family and motorcycling, that kind of thing. when we asked about the origin story of motorcycling, it sounded like it was sort of like you got a ride on a motorcycle, and that was sort of what got you hooked. And you said you got a motorcycle when you turned 18, and this makes me think that you didn't inherit motorcycling from your immediate family. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on like, have you had family members that you've had conversations with about motorcycles where you've had to convince them that it's safe or it's a good idea, or you have to convince them that you love it too much or whatever?
My dad was like, no way. Like in New York a kid in the 70s, and everyone had those mini bikes with the lawnmower engine, like the Cat mini bikes and the Rupp mini bikes and stuff like that. And he would never let me get one, even if I had my own money, which is why I bought my Grom. My Grom was the mini bike I could never own.
That's sweet.
But no, I never, like, my brother's a gearhead, but he's a car guy. He never really had any interest in motorcycles.
Okay.
But my parents, even when I was young or whatever, if they had a thing of, oh, they're too dangerous, they didn't bother saying it because they knew there was no way I was not going to ride. So it didn't, that was an argument not even worth having. So no one ever discouraged me from riding once I was 18 and I could do it.
Gotcha. So it was acceptance basically because they knew you loved it.
I don't know if it wasn't even an issue. It was just like, yeah, Alonzo rides motorcycles.
Okay.
That's what he does. Yeah. It wasn't an issue.
But it wasn't like you were like 12 years old being like, hey, I'd like a dirt bike, and they were supporting you in that way. Once you were old enough.
No.
Okay.
There was because remember, I grew up in New York City. Even in Queens, there was no dirt to ride dirt bikes. No, if you had a mini bike, you rode it illegally around the city. That's what you did.
I would say it doesn't stop a lot of the dirt bike kids. I'm here in Philadelphia, so
this is another group. These kids on these dirt bikes, and I saw the documentary about the Baltimore kids. I think that's where it started.
Yeah,
some of them are great riders, and there is that thing that, hey, if you gave them a place to ride, maybe they wouldn't ride downtown. If you gave them a dirt lot, if you gave them a construction site or something. And my friend Ricky Gatson is the ultimate proof, right? Ricky was an illegal street racer and he's literally the GOAT of dragster racing, right? There's a kid riding a dirt bike illegally in Philly or New York or something that could be a championship motocross rider if you gave him a chance.
100%.
Guaranteed.
Yeah. And we talked about it. I know years ago when I first started working at RevZilla, there was like a city council meeting that they held here, and they were trying to turn the old gas plants of South Philly into like an area where they would have riding for youth to go out and ride. And it got caught up in litigation, and, people were afraid of, litigious societies that we live in, and they ended up nixing it. But I agree with you. You look at some of these kids and the talent that they have, and it's unbelievable. If you could just harness that and give them a place to go, practice that, they would thrive.
Yeah, agreed. So, decent segue to our next topic, actually, which is a comment from a high side, low side listener sent in. We're going to get your take on this, Alonzo, and it has something to do, I think, actually, with this, getting into motorcycling and where do you go and how do you do it. This email comes from Austin, and it reads like this. I am just getting into motorcycling, and I love having fun content that talks about all aspects of the hobby and doesn't promote being super dumb on bikes. I think that's supposed to be a compliment to us, but I'll take that. As I'm getting into riding, I'm realizing that I don't know a single person that rides a motorcycle. I don't want a Harley, so no compatriots for the bike brand. I don't really want to ride in groups yet because I don't know people, and I'm not confident enough to ride off-road. Where do I go to find and make motorcycle friends? And I guess I'm curious, it sounds like you embarked on this journey by yourself, Alonzo, like you did.
Yeah, I prefer riding alone.
Okay.
It's one of those things. I've never been a member of a club.
Yep.
I had a few friends. There was a time when there were a bunch of us that went canyon riding. When I say a bunch, 10 guys.
Yeah.
And then one day, me and this other guy, like, they all went right, and he and I looked at each other, and we turned left, and we never rode with the group again. We were like, yeah, it's much more fun. But I would say to someone like that now, go online, check out the forums, and see where they meet up. There's all these ride groups on Facebook or in your individual brand forum, and they have meetups and they ride. Do that. That's I think would be the easiest. bike nights are weird. I never understood bike night. Like, I'm going to ride to a place, park my bike, and then walk around and look at them. I did that. I just never got that, you know. But
Right.
some people do it and it works for them.
But-
But yeah, I'd say go to the online groups and then meet up somewhere.
And even as someone who likes to ride alone, you have motorcycling friends, right? So when you think about
absolutely,
how you
yeah.
made those friends, what I don't know, is there any common denominator there?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, some of them I met at races.
Okay,
You know,
yeah.
definitely there's a crew I met at MotoGP races. The Rock Store, you know, but we're blessed in Southern California, right? The Rock Store is this incredible motorcycle hangout that's been
Right,
around
right.
for 50 years. And, you know, it's cruisers and sport bikes and people are there in the summer. It's packed, and, you know, so I met some people there. I've met people at bike shows. They used to have the big, you know, brand motorcycle shows in Long Beach.
right. Oh yeah, that's
and
right. IMS. Yeah.
The IMS show.
Right.
Stuff like that. I've met people. Never met the elusive, incredibly hot woman who's wearing full leathers with nothing but lingerie underneath and can't wait to halfway unzip it and pull her helmet off and shake out her hair. Still looking for her.
Right.
Very common. She lives on Instagram.
That's the lie. Those are the lies that
Right.
advertising tells us.
Well,
Yeah.
I tell
that
you,
Instagram tells you.
funny experience with that. I'm working the Long Beach Laugh Factory when I had my Diavel, and it was pretty cool. I had some carbon fiber bits and, you know, Termi pipes and all that, the stuff you put on a Ducati. I come out and there's this woman in lingerie leaning over my bike doing her photo shoot. She was like some Instagram model or whatever. And I was just
Using the
laughing, and she was like, oh, I said, no, enjoy yourself, have fun. I'll just wait over here. You know, because I was thinking, were you driving around in lingerie looking for vehicles to lean on? What a crazy, to me, that's crazy, but hey, good for her, you know, have fun. I don't know.
Do you have like? I think before we segue to the engine sound guessing game, you know,
And
obviously,
just wait, let me back up
Yeah.
1 second, because I joke about that. My favorite growing group, women riders. And I know women who could ride circles around me, and I love it. Women riders are badass. And they don't have to be the super sexy, this, that. They don't have to play any character. Just be a woman on a motorcycle, and I love it.
fair enough. I talk about that often. I think most of the women that I ride with are much faster than I am. When we're talking about, you know, back to Austin's question for a second here on finding motorcycle friends, you know, your main career choice outside of, you know, being a motorcycle influencer in your spare time is comedy. Do you have a lot of people within comedy that ride, or do you find yourself to be a bit of an anomaly outside of like Jay?
There's not a lot. There's a few of us. But the best is when my two worlds collide. So when something like when Americade first called and said, hey, we want you to do a comedy show here. And I went there and I did the whole show about motorcycles, because it's like, my people, you understand me. So I love when the two worlds collide, but I wouldn't say there are some comics who ride, but not a lot.
Right. And this is actually not something I considered before, because I've talked to you about Americade. I know you said you got a kick out of going to that event, and I forgot that you mentioned that that's a situation where your like set list changes quite a bit, right? So you can actually do motorcycle comedy.
No set list. There's no set list whatsoever. I go in, and the biggest joke are the brands, right? Because each brand has a reputation, right?
So you just make fun of everybody, basically?
Yeah. I
Nice,
joke
nice.
with the Harley riders about trailering their bikes and about cleaning their bikes. I joke with the BMW riders about how many hundreds of miles you rode before breakfast. I joke with the Gold Wing riders about how many lights can you actually put on the bike, and rather than bringing it on a trailer, you're pulling a trailer. And then you have the Indian crew is growing, so there's some jokes about them. But those three brands have probably the biggest identity. But
Right.
yeah, it all
Right.
becomes fun. The funniest thing ever at Americade was a group of guys. They called themselves the Wild Hogs. They were from Milwaukee. Not one of them had a Harley. It was like, you have to be kidding me. You can't write a joke funnier than that. And they were great guys. And then the following year, one of them showed up with an Indian, and he was so proud. to have an American V-twin. And I was like, good for you. You've done well.
So we are going to play the engine sound guessing game with you now. But speaking of your comedy, if we want to check out a show, or if we want to go, consume more, where would you, tell the audience to check out your work?
My website is alonzobodden.com. It's Bodden, but you could just Google Comic Alonzo. There's only two of us. There's me and there's Christella Alonzo. So you'll know I'm the taller one. And Zofunny, Zofunny, Zofunny on Instagram. So you can always find, I'm always touring. This week I'm actually doing Wait, Don't Tell Me. Next week I'll be in Tampa at Side Splitters, but then this is going to air in the future. So just check the website and you'll see where I am, or where I was, and you just missed me.
There we go. All right. Well, like I said, I've been going down a rabbit hole in preparation for this episode. I very much enjoy your work. It's been a pleasure having you on, but I think in conclusion, are you ready to try and win at the engine sound guessing game?
And you're one of the few people who have like a primer on this, because you did the sort of like stump the car nerd with Jay Leno thing. Yeah. So
the thing about Jay, the one that I missed, I had guessed correctly.
I
but
know.
Then I kept on
noticed
going.
that.
You said Mustang, and then you didn't shut up and stop yourself.
I know. He could have stopped me. He could have said, "Oh, you got it."
Right.
Well, we're not going to blindfold you, so we're going to let you keep your eyes open for this. But this is the way this works for the audience: is we are going to play an engine sound clip. Zach doesn't know the answer. I don't know the answer. Alonzo doesn't know the answer, and we do have two hints lined up. And we will hope that you are all playing along in your car stereos as you listen at home. But without any further ado, let's take a listen to the engine sound.
Oh man, this is it's a large displacement engine with stock pipes.
Stock pipes. Okay, how many cylinders are you hearing?
2.
Nice. That's what I'm hearing too. I think the starter motor is giving something away for the brand. Either one of you pick up on that?
Fuel injected.
Yeah, you can hear fuel pump going. I think it's a Harley Davidson is what I think.
That's too easy. It might be Indian or
Yeah, okay. Let's all take another listen.
Yeah, let's all play it one more time.
I'll play it
for
one
the
more
audience.
time, and the audience can hear it one more time as well.
yeah, I'm gonna go air-cooled Indian. Bird hint.
I was just listening, finishing listening one more time. Zach, did you have any final guesses before I give a hint? I'm big twin, but I'm not sophisticated enough to know between Indian or
I'm
Harley
convinced
Davidson.
the starter motor is a Harley.
All right.
And I don't know how big it is. I don't know how big it is. I don't even know how big
Well, that
Harley engines
starter
are.
was a big engine. That starter wasn't a KTM 390.
Well, let's go with the first hint, and this is going to help no one. The first hint of the day is V-twin.
Yeah, come on,
Well, we
Chase. We
already
knew
got
that.
that.
Yeah, we knew that.
I know.
All right, so what's the second hint?
This is producer Chase. I mean, between sending you audio clips on Macintosh computers and giving hints out, my God. Hint number 2, it is air and liquid cooled.
Wow.
Oh, then it has to be Harley or a BMW.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a V-twin, you said. So it would be a Harley.
V-twin.
Harley uses that water-cooled head.
Right, it's a
Right.
shower,
Are the
shower head
Indians
Harley.
are the Indians not liquid? They don't have it liquid cooled?
They're fully liquid-cooled or fully air-cooled.
I think
Harley
that's-
is the hybrid.
I think that's correct.
go.
I think that's correct. This is just dropping knowledge here. So it's gonna be a shower head. It's gonna be a touring model, probably, right? It's gonna be like a 20 whatever. It's gonna be a late model touring bike, a street glide, a road glide.
What do they call it? The something 8, the
A Milwaukee 8.
And Milwaukee
The
8.
Milwaukee 8,
I think that might be the engine that we're all reaching for, though our Harley knowledge is not famously deep on this show. Okay, we got to make...
Because we're not real men.
That's right. We're not real...
But we try, and that's the important thing. So the final answer, and I don't have the engine here, but it is a 2023 Harley-Davidson CVO Street Glide.
Street Glide.
So that would have been the big
touring
right?
model. And to your point, Alonzo, not especially loud pipes. It didn't sound like to me.
Yeah,
Well,
that was stop.
which I
That was
appreciate.
stop.
There is a fun fact here. So this bike was sent in from our listener Mark, and he has a Trask turbo installed.
That's
on
what
this.
that little whistle was.
Oh, that was
Interesting.
a whistle?
He has a Trask turbo. So thank you, Mark, for playing the game.
That's crazy. So he bought a CVO street. See, this is what I talk about Harley guys. Unlimited cash, unlimited money when you have a Harley. So you already bought the $40,000 CVO
Right.
Street Glide or Road Glide, which is their best bike, right? Their biggest 121 motor, and then you put a turbo on it.
Yeah.
That's
And then they have another one that some people do. No, this is they make a 131 engine you can buy for
Right.
$10,000. So
Crate
some
motor.
people buy that bike and then they're like, okay, now here's another 10 grand for that engine.
Yeah.
Without ever having ridden the standard one. So
well, Mark just went ahead and put a
More
turbo
money
right
than
on there.
sense. Yeah.
And that would have taken a real keen ear to catch the. I did hear that little whistle. I just thought it was like intake noise, but I guess it was.
that's an interesting. Look, I just got a Google verification code just in time. That's an interesting engine to turbocharge. I don't know that I would say turbocharging is the best thing for that engine.
Yeah, I don't know. I take it you've never ridden a turbo Harley, Alonzo?
Well, the reason I say that is because a turbo, right? You got to spin the turbo for extra pressure on the intake, and that's a low revving engine. You know,
How do you feel about turbos on bikes in general? I'm very interested to know where you land on this.
They're not smooth enough. The technology's not there yet. They're not. It doesn't feel as integrated. The superchargers I think work better.
Yeah.
I rode the what is it? The Kawasaki supercharged bike.
The
H2?
The naked,
the H2,
not the H2, not the super $50,000 one, but like the street version of it.
Okay, was that the ZH2? Maybe the naked one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So rode that with a friend. He was testing it for a magazine. Just listening to the whistle, it was so much fun. I said, I'm buying one of these. This is about 3 or 4 years ago, right? Was this pre-pandemic? Yeah, so maybe 5, whatever. I said, I'm riding it this summer, and then I'm selling it to someone who should have it. And that is absolutely what happened. Like, the bike's small, my knees hurt, but that supercharger was so much fun. I just wanted to ride it for a couple of months, and then this kid bought it, I don't know, in his early 20s, and I knew he was the right one to buy it. I live in L.A., he lives in Utah. It's Thanksgiving weekend, it's cold. Him and 2 friends drove their broken down Ford ST to my house and said, we're going to tag team ride this bike back to Utah. And I was like, oh, it's in good hands. These are the exact kids who should have this bike. I bet that bike's just tearing Utah up right now. It was fun.
I think that's probably the best place to end this, in the fact that we have Alonzo on record saying that turbos are not ready for motorcycles.
That's
yet.
not what he
They're
said.
not
That's
there
not what he
yet.
said. He said the
And
technology's not
superchargers
there
are the way
yet,
to
which
go.
means
and
if
we're
if the brands actually leaned
we
into
can't
it
waste
and
any
tried to
more
do
of
it,
his
they could figure it
time,
out.
Zach. Stop
I see.
it.
So
Don't
we
you
have
do it.
one pro turbo and one anti-turbo.
Yeah.
I'm just
guy.
saying,
And-
Alonzo, if you think
yep.
about all the BMW sedans out there with turbos on them, like the technology, no motorcycle company has tried to make one good in the past
But
30
you have
years.
know why?
twin turbos,
But
it's so
you know
much
why?
room on a car.
Because you don't need it on a bike. That's why, because you don't need it.
This comes from the guy who had a 2300cc motorcycle. You don't
End
need
the
it, he says.
podcast right
You
now,
don't-
Alonzo.
you-
It has been a
listen.
pleasure having you on today, and I can't think of a.
Normally aspirated technology is making bikes fast enough. There's no need to turbocharge them. Other than the fun of the experiment of doing it, why bother?
This is
You know,
like the
with
RT all
cars-
over again, Alonzo. I'm going to prove
With
you wrong.
cars,
I'm
it
gonna
made
prove you
sense.
wrong.
With cars, it made sense.
Yeah, I have
Zach,
no more. I have no more
They've been
questions.
trying to prove us wrong on this since the early '80s, Zach.
No, I think they tried to prove us wrong once in the early '80s and then gave up on it since. Is my read on it. But fair enough. I'm outvoted 2-1 on this podcast. Turbos are a bad idea. I'll capitulate for now. But I'm going to come back to this. Both of you, I'm going to come back. You're going to try
We'll
my
have
turbo
to talk,
motorcycle
and
at
you'll
some
have
point.
to explain to me why you think they're a good idea.
I don't know that they are. I just want to experiment with it, you guys.
He likes playing the devil's advocate.
The turbo's
more
advocate.
often than
That's
not.
what I
Well,
like
Zach,
playing.
you need to become friends with some Harley people, find out where they get all that money, and then you can experiment all you want. Because
Mark.
they have to.
Mark with
They
his
got
turbo
the money.
CVO. I just need to be friends with Mark and his turbo CVO.
There you
And
go.
I'll be right in the world. All right, Alonzo, thanks so much for hanging out with us. We definitely appreciate it. And we hope that you all listeners will look up ZoFunny on Instagram and AlonzoBodden.com to see where you can find Alonzo next.
It was fun.
Thank you, my friend. This was great.
All righty, everybody. Alonzo Bodden. That was a fun conversation right up until the end when he agreed with you on turbos, which I don't appreciate. I'm going to have to circle back on that.
I couldn't have planned that better. if
Oh,
I
you
tried.
really couldn't have. No,
Yeah.
it was music to your ears, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, that was a fun discussion and yeah, super fun to talk to someone who is not really an industry person or I don't think he walks around talking about how much he knows about motorcycles or how much he knows about mechanics, but you can tell there's a lot of knowledge there. It's super fun to talk to him about bikes and he has really encyclopedic memory of like what he's owned and what he's ridden and then things he's done. It's really fun.
We didn't ask him how many bikes he's owned, and that's a question.
He suggested that it was a lot. Yeah.
Man, oh man, it sounds like he's somebody that's buying and selling. Like when he was talking about the Bandit, and he's like, it cost me about $1,000 a day to own that bike for 3 days. I'm just like, that's crazy, man. To like buy a bike and be like, no, I just don't like it. I'm gonna trade it on a speed triple.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. It's a good life if you can live it. So he's doing it. So yeah, we hope you got a kick out of that interview and that discussion. We certainly did. We will move on.
Yeah. Speaking of living a good life, someone is about to win a T-shirt from us with the high side, low side logo on it. And this comes in via our Apple Podcast reviews. For those of you out there that would be so kind, if you can head over to the Apple Podcast app and leave us a loving review. Zach and I do like to read through these, and we just want to say that it does help with the distribution of the podcast, which is why we ask you to do it. And today's winner is nickname for Nick ? And
Nickname for Nick?
Nickname for Nick ? Writes in and says, I never listened to a podcast ever. And now, as I await the misery of my first trimester to pass and my dear wife to feel better as baby number 4 is firmly implanting itself into her uterus, the father and father-to-be who hosts this show take a little of the drudgery out of the increased load of household responsibilities I must embrace. So thank you for helping me to look forward to the lack of dishwasher in my kitchen. Plus, I could use a new t-shirt. With a growing family, one must be frugal, a concept that the esteemed Spencer Roberts should appreciate, as the mere mention of his name almost guarantees me fresh swag. But seriously, do you have kid sizes too? I'll probably need another one for my pregnant women wearing their husband's. His pregnant wife is wearing his t-shirts, and goes on to say, I love the show. That's a lot of information to unpack.
A lot to unpack there. Bottom line, this is a dad of 3, about to be a dad of 4, would like some free clothing, and we're going to oblige. And we would also just love to point out, this is a well-written review / message to us, which we very much appreciate. But also love the call out that if you don't have a dishwasher, this guy's making lemonade here. He's getting lemon. He's got no dishwasher in his kitchen, but he's like, I've got to do the dishes. I'll listen to high side, low side. And these guys will keep me company as I scrub dishes for my family. I appreciate that perspective. It's glass half full.
never listened to a podcast before, and we were the introduction. Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Well, so nickname for Nick, the soon-to-be father of 4. We appreciate your message. We appreciate your family. We do not have kid sizes, but we'll send you a t-shirt or 3. Just send us your t-shirt size and your preferred mailing address to highside@RevZilla.com, and we'll get your swag in the mail.
Yeah, maybe we have some smalls or extra smalls.
Yeah, why not? We'll send a few different, right? We can do that.
There you go.
Can I do that? I think
wrap it around like a diaper. I was just in a swaddling class the other day. I can swaddle a baby up in a t-shirt like nobody's business.
Indeed.
All right. Well, Zach, if you're watching this on YouTube, hopefully you've left us a comment. If you're, listening to this on your favorite podcasting app, hopefully you've sent us an email to highside@RevZilla.com. We ask that you share this with your friends, share this with loved ones, share this with people that like motorcycles, that don't like motorcycles, that, maybe are fans of Alonzo, and just want to get a little bit of comedy in their life. But we've come to the end of season 8. It's hard to believe, 1, how fast this season went, and 2, all the different events that, touched this season. Anything that stands out to you, in this final thought for the past 12 episodes that we produced?
I know. It's been quite a ride. Usually we do sort of like a takeaway for the episode. But yeah, a takeaway from the season. I don't know. I think we've covered more ground than we normally do. We've talked about new bikes. We experimented with a trivia show. We interviewed our dads. There's just been so much stuff that we've talked about. And I would say that my takeaway is that I'm proud of all the ground we've covered. And it makes me curious where we'll go in season 9. But I've had a real hoot recording the season of this podcast, Spurg, and I hope you feel the same.
Yeah, I think the fun part of season 8 has been the fact that we're not afraid to try things. Whether that's, we were able to bring Peter Egan on the podcast, which was
right.
a huge moment for me. We've had people asking us in the past, to bring our fathers on for an episode, and we finally sat down and tried to figure out a way to do that.
Yep.
Even bringing Alonzo on, was something that was new ground for us, as, Alonzo's a little bit outside of the motorcycling world. So being able to bring a comedian on to the podcast, I thought was just exciting. And to our listeners, we know that sometimes we do this well, and sometimes we create some ire. But we're trying, and we appreciate all of you out there that stick with us and keep coming along as Zach and I try some things that work, and we try to iterate on them, and some things, maybe they don't work so well, and we iterate on those maybe in a different direction. So thank you to all the listeners that have been patient with Zach and I as we've tried things in season 8.
Indeed. That's definitely the way that we should end here today, to say thank you for all of the viewers and listeners out there who have enjoyed, shared, or at least gotten a kick out of briefly high side, low side during any one of the 8 seasons, but especially this one. We have had fun doing it, and we appreciate you sticking with us. And we a friendly reminder that you can send your engine sounds, a bike starting up, revving a few times, and shutting off, about 30-second clip, to highside, lowside at RevZilla.com to have your bike featured in future episodes of Rev Trivia. And we've done a lot of patting ourselves on the back and saying how much fun we've had. But if you've got critiques, comments, things you'd like to change, feel free to send us those too.
And if you have any suggestions for guests for season 9, we are going right into pre-production for season 9 too. So again, thanks to Alonzo Bodden for joining us today. And we look forward to many more conversations with many more people that appreciate riding on 2 wheels as we start thinking about season 9.
Yes, indeed. It's been fun, Spurg. It's been fun, all you listeners. Thanks for hanging around. We'll see you in season 9.